a great, reliable vehicle that I should have continued driving. That's a theme throughout most of my cars.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello. So we wanted to talk today about all of the cars that both of us have owned since we started driving.
So, I'll start. Spoiler alert, my list is a fraction of the size of Adam's. So, when I was 16, my first car was a 2001 Pontiac Bonneville. It was fully loaded, like every feature you could think of. It was my first experience with a heated seat, which probably changed my life. And I drove that car for a very long time. I'm pretty sure I drove it until, well, it died. The transmission went and I abandoned it on the side of the road and had to go back for it. That was a whole thing. But I think I drove it until I was like 22. No, I think 21. So that's 5 years. And after that, I got my Legacy, which I'm realizing I don't remember the year of my Legacy.
I want to say it was like a 2007 or 2008.
Yes, it was a 2007, and it was this like brown color that I liked. The funny thing about that car is I bought it from Van Boordel, which I've always loved Van Boordel, and I drove it for literally like 4 months. And then decided I just didn't like it anymore. I had like seen some of the new Imprezas, new at that time, which was, oh my gosh, we had just started dating, so it was 2013, I think.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want this stupid Legacy anymore. I want an Impreza. So I went back to Van Boordel, cried them a river about how I just didn't want this car anymore. And they just took it back from me like it never happened. They gave me exactly what I had paid. I was out $0 for
you didn't make a single payment.
Yeah, I didn't make a single payment. I don't remember how this worked out. Or maybe I did. I don't know. Whatever happened, they like erased the car from the history of my life. Made it like it never happened, and I bought a new, it's my first and only new car. I bought a new 2013 Impreza hatchback.
Didn't you have to order it because it was manual? They didn't have any?
I did. They didn't have any manual ones on the lot. Yeah, and it took a while to come in, and it was red, which wasn't my first choice, but it was like one of the first ones they could get. I forget how the colors worked out, but I just wanted a dark interior instead of a light interior, so I just told them I would take any of the body colors that had the dark colored interior, which red was one of them, so I ended up with that Impreza, which then I drove for, I want to say 2 or 3 years until I bought this, the Outback, and you all know all about the Outback, so I'll spare you that, and I've been driving the Outback ever since. So that makes a grand total of 4 cars that I have owned. It's really, I barely even count the Legacy, like I hardly remember it. It was literally a couple months, so it's more like 3 and like a quarter cars that I've owned. Alright, next.
Alright. So, before I was 16, I really wanted a muscle car, and I couldn't afford a muscle car. But one of my friends knew a neighbor who was selling a 1972 Lincoln Continental Mark IV. It was orange with a brown shag interior and a Landau top. And it was a boat of a car. It was like 18 feet long. But it had a big block V8 Ford motor in it, so I didn't care and bought it for like $700 or something like that.
Oh my god. Wait, how old were you? Were you like 15?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was right before I got my learner's permit. But that car never made it on the road.
What did your parents think about this?
Oh, I'm sure they just thought it was a bunch of nonsense. They had no problem with it.
How'd you get $700?
I was working.
Oh, okay.
Wait, what was that? No, I hadn't started working at McDonald's yet, because I think I started working at McDonald's when I was 16. Anyway, I don't know. I must have had...
As a 15-year-old, I can assure you I never had $700. Anyway.
I don't actually remember the details of that part.
I'll ask your mom sometime.
So then I inherited my sister's 94 Saturn SC2 coupe. It was teal and it was a 5-speed, so that's the main reason I had no problem inheriting that. So that was my first real car.
And the main reason your sister had no problem giving it to you, I'm sure.
Right, she was in college at the time. She had no reason to have it. And it was, I don't even remember how old it was. It was kind of beat up though.
Well,
Not
I'm
too
sure
bad.
you were the only one that like willingly drove a manual car. They were probably like, what is this nonsense?
Right. So I drove that when I was 16, when I first got my license. That was my car while I was in high school. I was into cars at the time, so of course I wanted something other than a teal Saturn. So eventually I sold that and I bought my 1985 Camaro IROC Z.
Which this is kind of funny because I remember when I was like 16 and I wanted my parents they didn't buy me the car, but they were like, we'll take out a loan and you can make the payments, which I could have really screwed them over on that, but I didn't because I was a good child. I really wanted a Camaro and my mom was like, under no circumstances are you getting a Camaro. There was one for sale like around the corner from my house and I would be like, oh mom, look. She's like, no, absolutely not. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah. I wanted any muscle car, sports car. Basically, I wanted a V8. I wanted a manual. This one happened to be a manual, which was super rare for third generation Camaros and specifically IROCs. So it was the 305 V8 and the 5-speed, and it was a total piece of junk. I think that one was $950. I ended up rebuilding the engine in my parents' garage because it spun a main bearing, and that ended up taking months, and I think I oil slicked my parents' garage forever. There's probably still oil stains to this day on that garage from me rebuilding it. And neither of my parents could park in the garage for like 2 months, which I have no idea how they put up with that, but they did.
Because you're the baby and they love you.
So...
And this is your only source of nonsense, is car nonsense. Other
Yes.
than that, I feel like you were a fairly like innocuous, like innocent child. Just like God only knows what you would get up to in the garage.
So that car was a mess. It was fun, but it always had problems, and I don't think it was ever on the road for more than a couple months at a time. I did drive it a bit, but something was always going wrong with it, so I needed something else. My other sister, who was also in college, had a Geo Tracker that was also teal. I don't remember what year it was. 95, maybe it was the boxy one, not the soft top. It was the four-door hard top, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was an automatic, but it was a 4x4, so I did get into some off-road nonsense with that car, and it did surprisingly well. It had like a 1.5 liter engine, so it made
Well, the thing is, like,
no
light as a
power.
feather, too,
right,
though.
but it was still super slow. It was crazy slow.
Woo. Driving is just so hard.
I did get into some nonsense with that, I'm sure. I don't think I ever got pulled over in that one. I definitely got pulled over.
Oh,
in
wait, I'm sorry. Are we talking about our history of tickets? Because I glazed over that part.
We don't have to get into that. 'Cause that'll
Okay,
be an
that's
even
another
longer
video.
conversation.
Spoiler alert, we've both had our licenses suspended.
That could be another video. Anyway, so I had the Tracker also while I was in high school as a more reliable vehicle while the Camaro wasn't always working. But of course it was a teal Tracker and it was automatic, so I didn't want it, even though it was a great reliable vehicle that I should have continued driving. That's a theme throughout most of my cars.
Yeah.
So I ended up selling that one, and then I bought a 91 Eagle Talon TSI all-wheel drive, so the turbo all-wheel drive model. That was a 5-speed. It was at my friend's shop, and he couldn't get the oil filter off. So he said if you can change the oil, or if you can get the oil filter off, then you can have the car for $1,500. And I think at the time they were worth like $3,000 or $4,000.
What kind of sword in the stone baloney is that?
It was, somehow the oil filter got stuck on and it got crushed when he was trying to take it off, so you couldn't get an oil filter wrench on. I think I ended up buying this like claw oil remover thing that tightened as you loosened the oil filter that ultimately got the thing off, but it was nonsense. I think I worked on that for like a week before I could get the oil filter off. But that car was amazing. That was the first time I drove an all-wheel drive turbo manual car, and that's essentially what changed my
Here we are.
life. Yeah. So that I drove for a while. It's a DSM, Diamond Star Motors, for those who are unaware, Mitsubishi product, and they are notoriously unreliable. So that had its own host of problems. I did have that until I graduated high school and eventually sold it. So then I was going to tech school after high school, and I needed something reliable.
So wait, let's set the scene. What year is this?
This is 2005. I currently have the Eagle Talon, and I have the Camaro. The Camaro's carbureted, so I can't really drive it in the winter, and it has problems. So my parents didn't want me taking that, and I didn't think it was a good idea to take it to Pennsylvania with me to go to tech school. So then No, I didn't sell that. I kept that. I sold the Talon to somebody who was going to put the engine in like a Dodge Colt or something. I bought a 92 Honda Civic hatchback. It was a Civic CX, which is like the base model. So no power windows, no power locks, no power steering. It weighed 2,000 pounds, but it made 72 horsepower, so it was slow but agile. So I drove that while I was in tech school. I eventually sold that back to the kid who I bought it from after I graduated tech school because I hated it. That was around the period of time where I lost my license, which I can go into at a later period of time. But my dad was letting me drive his 2001 Pontiac Sunfire. I was going to buy it from him, but then I gave it back, so I don't know if that counts or not.
Was that manual?
No, it was an automatic, and it was really slow and a horrible car. So then, after that point in time, I moved back to New York, and did I have a car? I don't think I had a car. I think I was driving the Sunfire, maybe. But I got a job at a bottle factory, and then I was able to actually afford a car. So then,
by bottle factory, he means like Nalgene bottles.
Yes, plastic bottles.
Which, for some reason, I don't know. I feel like, why did I point that out? Like, I think Nalgene bottles are cool, but I can't drink out of them. The opening's too wide. Anyway.
So it was like a real job, and I was able to afford a car payment. So that's
that
when I bought that's when I bought my first Subaru, my 2002. Impreza WRX, the bug-eye style. It was the World Rally Blue, 5-speed manual. It was an amazing car.
Love it. We would buy another one if it happened.
Absolutely.
If it happened to cross our path.
I bought it from my friend's dad, so it was a one-owner car. It had like 40,000 miles on it. It was in perfect shape, and I drove that while I was going to community college.
Like right now, if you say bug-eye to someone, they think much older. So this is what, 2000?
2002, so 0203.
No. I mean, what year was this happening?
This was 2008.
Right, so that's only a 6-year-old car at that time.
It was still in great shape, fairly new. So I drove that for a couple of years. I was going to community college, and then...
Sure, all the ladies were into that bug-eye. I know I would have been.
So at some point in time, I was going part-time to community college. I decided to get a part-time job and go full-time to community college. Unfortunately, I couldn't keep that car anymore. I couldn't afford the car payment. I ended up having to sell it. So I sold it a couple years later, and then I just needed a cheap car. So I found I think it was a 92 or 93 Infiniti G20. Which was a 5-speed. It was red, 4-door. It's the same thing as the Nissan Sentra, but like the Infiniti version, so it's a little bit nicer. And it had the SR20 motor. That's a known motor that people like to modify. So I thought it was going to be great. It was a piece of crap. I drove that for about a year, and then I think it died. After that, I found a 92 Subaru SVX, which is the weird wedge-shaped coupe that they made in the early 90s to compete with all the other Japanese coupes. That was an interesting car.
She's not cute. If you've never seen one, it's not cute. Sorry.
I think they look nice, but that car had its own host of problems. They're known for transmission issues. Of course, I had to have the transmission rebuilt. I had to borrow $2,500 from my parents to get it towed to a transmission shop and the transmission rebuilt. Yeah. Then it had a bunch of other problems. I think a wheel bearing went, all 4 tires went. It had an exhaust leak. I ended up getting pulled over for the exhaust leak, and my inspection was overdue because of all of that stuff. I couldn't afford to fix all of it at once, so I had to put that off the road. At that point in time, my parents loaned me more money. I was really in debt to my parents for a while. They loaned me more money to get a 2002 Mazda Protege 5, so the sporty little wagon that Mazda made for a little while. That was also a 5-speed. I called it the Radio Flyer because it was a little red wagon, and I got Radio Flyer stickers printed out and pasted on the doors of the car. So that one I was driving when I got my current job, and it had gotten hit in the parking lot. It was starting to have problems. The engine started running on 3 cylinders. It wouldn't go into 5th gear. I didn't really want to fix it, so I traded it for a 2012 Subaru WRX. So that's the only brand new car I ever bought. This was late 2011.
Yeah.
So that was my gray 2012 Subaru WRX hatchback 5-speed. So that was the car that I had when we met.
And side note, so I don't know, I've always been into cars, but I was never really into like the car scene until he and I got together. But I remember he was telling me about his car, and I was like so worried. I was like, oh my god, if it's like slammed, what am I gonna do? So we went out for our first date. It was at Spot Coffee, and we were gonna go somewhere else after because, you know, the date was going good. So he's like, oh, I parked around the corner. So we're like, what? I think like it was something like that. Like we were walking to your car. I can't see. Is there a car coming?
No. Was I in the parking garage?
No, you weren't. We were in the parking garage later that night when we drove back. I think I left my car in the parking garage. You were parked like on Winthrop or something, I want to say. Like, anyway, that doesn't matter at all. The point is that it was lifted, not lowered. It was like a little more rally-y than like can't drive out of a parking lot-y. So
yeah,
he got some points.
He got some points inches. I put
that
light truck tires, like knobby tires on it, and big mud flaps.
Which it was a little excessive, but it was still just the direction. I'm glad you went that direction instead of it went up, not down.
So I drove that car for 3 years, and then just had to have an STI. Just wanted the brakes. I wanted the transmission and the limited slip differentials. I know. It's just funny. So,
oh, whoops. Sorry.
Most people who've done that before, and so many people have gone from a WRX to an STI specifically for that, because you start looking into modifying the WRX and you realize it's actually cheaper to just upgrade to an STI. So I really, really wanted a white 0405 STI. I'd been on the lookout, and I found one in Pennsylvania about 4 hours away. I went and looked at it. It was what I thought pretty close to stock. I thought it was clean. It ended up being a total mess.
I mean, at this point, our lovely audience has seen where that has gotten us.
They haven't seen the whole history, which that'll be an entire video by itself.
Yeah.
And at some point when that car's back to running and driving condition, we can ride around in it and talk about that. So I bought that in, I don't even remember what year that was.
Well, we were living in Canandaigua.
Yeah, so I drove that for a couple
and
years.
And here's the problem, is I supported that decision.
Well, actually, that's one of the reasons I wanted to buy it, is because I showed it to you and you said, okay.
Wait a second. If I had said no, you wouldn't have bought it?
Probably not.
You should, honestly, it would be safer if we were both married to other people. We should not be allowed to hang out together. I'm sorry, I ruined your life.
So I drove that for a couple years. It ended up blowing up. We were looking to buy a house at the time. so I couldn't really afford to fix it right away.
Yeah, when we were looking to buy a house, we got like really, really conservative with money.
So I bought a $1,200 pickup truck, so that's the Silverado, my 99 Silverado, regular cab, short bed, V8 5-speed 4x4, which is all of those things are the reason why I wanted it so bad. It was in really bad shape, but I didn't have to put that much money into it right away.
Because your wife is an enabler, I gave that the stamp of approval, so I was like, oh good, it's manual. like that was some sort of redeeming quality.
Exactly, but luckily we were able to use that to move, so we didn't have to hire a moving truck or anything.
Okay, now you're just justifying it.
So I still have that one. I still have the STI, and then when the STI died the second time and the truck was off the road,
we laugh because it keeps us from crying.
That's when I leased the Civic Si, because I just needed something that was reliable. So
yeah,
there we are. That's all of the cars that I have owned and or borrowed for short periods of time while I have had my driver's license. So I did not keep track of how many that is. Over a dozen, I think. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's also a lot of, I feel like, small cash transactions for like.
Yeah, a few of them were under $1,000 or around. So.
Yeah. However, he is really good at knowing what exactly you have to have in order, like at the DMV to buy a car. I would have no idea where to start because like I've only ever bought them from dealerships and they like, you know, connect the dots for you.
I used to be really nervous when I would go to the DMV with paperwork buying a used car because I always felt that I was underprepared and that they were going to yell at me, because that did happen a few times. And now I'm at the point where I'm very confident when I buy a used car and I make sure I have all my ducks in a row, so I guess there's that.
And that's what we've learned so far.
Yes, there's the lesson there.
Alright, well this was just sort of a silly little video. We hope you liked it.
Yeah.
And
We'll see you guys later.
Guess that's it. Bye.
Bye.